Hey there everybody, Scotia here, and now that we're on the other side of the big info dump that we've been having with Street Fighter 6, that all started with the State of Play trailer and all the information that came out with that, and then eventually the Gala reveal trailer, and then people, going out and playing the game for themselves and all this footage coming up, I feel like that now is a good time for me to kind of just give my honest thoughts about the game, where the game is at the moment, based on what we've seen and what we know both from Capcom themselves and through leaks. So there will be leaks discussion in this video, so that's your warning. If you are trying to stay clear of all that, make sure to stay away from this video basically. But I kind of want to just give my thoughts on the game, my positives, my negatives, my concerns, my worries, my surprises, the things I've been pleasantly surprised at, the things that I'm impressed by, and kind of just go over and just kind of speak on my behalf as somebody who was there from Street Fighter 5 day one, who was disappointed by that game, but still stuck with it until I eventually just completely lost interest, and also speaking as somebody who is such a big fan of Street Fighter 3 and Third Strike specifically, and kind of just what my thoughts are on Street Fighter 6 and where Street Fighter 6 is going and what it's showing to be doing based on kind of where my personal preferences lie. So that's basically what this video is going to be about. Hopefully it's not going to be too long. I don't really want to spend ages waffling about this, but yeah, I kind of thought this was the good time, because we now know that Capcom are kind of going back into the dojo, as they so said in their tweet talking about this, and they're going to go back and they're going to continue development of the game, and all they've said is we're not going to hear more until later this year. That can mean anything really. It could mean next week, it could be next month, it could be Evo. I definitely think we'll hear 100% something by Evo, but I feel like we'll probably hear something probably by next month, but that's kind of, neither here nor there. So yeah, that's kind of what this video is going to be basically. It's going to be me just kind of just talking about what I think about the game so far. So right off the bat, I just want to go out and say, without any kind of hesitation or clickbaiting or kind of stringing you guys along or whatever, I am completely blown away by this game. Every time I see it, my expectations of what it was and what Capcom are currently doing with this game keep getting blown away every time. And a large part of that is, I think, due to the direction and the production done by Takayuki Nakayama and Shuhei Matsumoto. If you know those people, if you remember them, they are the people who have basically been kind of the faces of Street Fighter ever since Season 5 started. For those that don't know, or for those who forgot, Season 5 was kind of an emergency DLC season done for Street Fighter 5 because for various reasons, and I'm sure reasons we'll probably never fully know the full details of, this season of DLC, Season 5 of Street Fighter 5, was done for two main reasons, and the one that kind of was the most obvious, and I think it was the one that Capcom themselves said was the reason, basically because of COVID. COVID kind of came and things got messed around, and then at the time they never really said why COVID messed things around enough for them to make more content, because at this time you have to remember we didn't know Street Fighter 6 was in the works officially. It had been rumoured and I think leaked a couple times by that point, but in Capcom's world, in Capcom's view, they hadn't officially said anything yet. But at that point, a lot of people assumed that Street Fighter 6 was coming, and that another reason about it was that probably Street Fighter 6 needed a bit more time in the oven. It needed more time before it could eventually be shown and then eventually released. And again, I'm not going to go into the full details, they're all out there. There were lots of stuff. Odo was a big part of that from what I remember from all the reports and the rumours that were going around at the time. But yeah, ever since the Season 5 showcase where they first announced most of the lineup of Season 5 for Street Fighter 5, things have just been on such an upward swing for Capcom, and especially Street Fighter and the Capcom fighting game division. And at this point, you can pretty much comfortably say that it is thanks to Takayuki Nakayama and Shuhei Matsumoto. And this has continued in Street Fighter 6 beyond my wildest imaginations. I never ever would have thought that all the time while we were, playing Street Fighter 5, when they were doing, the arcade edition, and when they were doing this and that, when they were revealing Kage and the very weird communication that happened following Kage's initial announcement, and everything in between then, never would I have thought that this was the game that they were making, and the biggest part of that is just like when I look at Street Fighter 5, and I don't hate Street Fighter 5, I enjoyed my time with that game, I can still pick that game up and have a couple of matches and enjoy it, but there was just something about Street Fighter 5 that was just never right about it. Something just never felt right. It never felt like it had its own cohesive vision. It honestly kind of felt like a game that was just kind of like stapled together and kind of thrown out the door. And it's always kind of had that Frankenstein's monster type feel to me because of that feeling of like it's been so like stitched together. Because I don't know about later DLC seasons, but I know for a fact that like early in Street Fighter 5's life, like a lot of characters were made by outsourced studios. I know Alex, for example, in Street Fighter 5, he was outsourced to a different studio, which is probably why his model looked so rough in Street Fighter 5. And the same with numerous other characters, both in the base roster and in the first season of DLC. And I think that really contributed overall to Street Fighter V's more Frankenstein's monster kind of feeling that at least I got. I don't know if other people feel the same way, but yeah, it never really felt like it had its own vision. You know, it never really felt like Street Fighter 5 was its own thing. And I've said this before in other videos. Like, one of my biggest requests for Street Fighter 6 was that it just felt like its own thing. You know, it felt like Street Fighter 6. When I look at Street Fighter 6, I wanted it to be, yep, that's undisputedly what Street Fighter 6 is. Because when I looked at Street Fighter 5, it kind of picked and chose from different games in the series, and Street Fighter 6 is doing the same, but it's doing it with its own flair, and I'll kind of get to that in a minute. But Street Fighter 5, like, it took a little bit from Alpha, it took a little bit from 3, it took a little bit from 4, and it never felt like its own game. It did it a couple times, especially when it first came out. You know, Street Fighter 5 did have its own kind of visual identity. It wasn't wholly unique. You know, there's often been the case from people that have said that Street Fighter 5, you know, from a distance or whatever, looked like Street Fighter 4. I get what they're saying, but I never thought, like, you know, it was never like the same. Like, I don't know how anybody can really look at Street Fighter 4 then look at Street Fighter 5 and think that they're the same game. But in terms of the art style and things like that, and graphically, yeah, I wouldn't forgive people for thinking that maybe Street Fighter 5 was like a very updated version of Street Fighter 4. I don't know, I'm kind of rambling, but like, yeah, Street Fighter 5 never really felt like its own thing. It felt like it's such a conglomerate kind of just merging of elements, and it just never felt right to me. It was enjoyable, but it just never felt right. And right out the gate, Street Fighter 6 is just full of life. It's full of soul. It's full of just everything that you can just, from the moment you see it, you can just so see clearly the vision that Nakayama and Matsumoto and everyone who's working on this game at Capcom, you can just see in every inch, every little detail, that they care, you know, they give a shit. They want this game to succeed, they want Street Fighter to succeed, and they want to make everybody happy. And so just right off the bat, I really want to get out of the way. Like, honestly, I actually have very little complaints. At the moment, I only really have one, and I'm sure if you've, you know, seen other videos on this channel, you'll probably know what that complaint is, but I'll get to that in a minute, or later on in the video. But yeah, I just, when I see this game, and I'm currently like watching gameplay of you know, some just match footage while I, you know, record this, and like just from the character select screen and the menus, it's just like, I love everything about it. I love the graffiti aesthetic, I love the neon, just the underground street vibe. It's just, it's nailing everything it's trying to do. It's nailing so perfectly, and it's so good to just have such a clear vision for a Street Fighter game, to just be like, this is what Street Fighter 6 is. This is what they wanted the game to be. And there's been some details. I think there was an interview that Nakayama and Matsumoto did the other day for IGN Japan, and there were a lot of other details in there, mostly kind of like bits and bobs here and there, but there was a couple of like really standout details that I might, you know, offhandedly mention as I kind of go through this video if I feel like they're kind of like relevant to what I'm talking about. And this is the first one, in that Nakayama said in this interview that in 2018, so this was the year that the arcade edition was coming out, I think at the start of 2018, so that was when, you know, Sakura, Blanca, Sagat, Falk, Cody and G, that was their season. When that season was coming out, and just the year of that season, and, you know, the update to arcade edition for Street Fighter 5, Nakayama created a booklet, a 92-page booklet, that was a proposal of what he wanted Street Fighter 6 to be. And he said in this interview that since then, like, very little of that booklet has changed. And he also says in the interview, but I also know for a fact, like, that's very rare for stuff like that to happen, for a booklet of a proposal that's also like that size to still at this point, all these years later, still be relatively unchanged is quite rare, which to me really shows the strength of the vision that Nakayama had for this game. And I think you can really tell that he had a strong vision and that they've stuck to it. But the thing that stood out to me about this, you know, part of the interview that Nakayama is talking about this proposal booklet, is that he says that there were 3 core pillars, and he calls them pillars. There were 3 pillars of Street Fighter 6 in this proposal booklet, and these 3 pillars were there from the moment he created it and are there today. And those 3 pillars were Fighting Ground, Battle Hub, and World Tour. And obviously, as we all know, who've seen the trailers and seen all the stuff that's been coming out for the game, those are the 3 key game modes for Street Fighter 6. And We know not a lot about Battle Hub. They've been very coy about that. They've only shown a little brief teaser. I have my own theories that I might get into later about what Battle Hub might be, and if my theories are correct, I actually think it might be a really, really cool thing. Fighting Ground is kind of the game itself. It's like what you would normally expect Street Fighter to be, you know, all your game modes, you know, your online, your arcade, your versus CPU, like that's kind of where Street Fighter is, like the Street Fighter that everybody's more familiar with. And then you have World Tour, and that's the mode that I think at the moment probably interests me the most. It's either that or Battle Hub, and I think Battle Hub kind of is close because of what it could be. But in terms of what we like directly know about it, World Tour mode is honestly probably the most exciting thing I think this series has ever done. And I don't say that lightly, you know, I think the series has done so many interesting things, which is why I've kind of like been so attached to, you know, Street Fighter 3 and those games, because they did things so differently and they really shook up the series. But I think this is something that is not only going to shake up the series of Street Fighter, but I think it also could shake up other fighting games. Like when you look at like other story modes in other fighting games, the first one you probably think of is NetherRealm Studios and their cinematic story modes, and that all started with Mortal Kombat 9, or just Mortal Kombat the reboot from 2011. And that game's cinematic story mode really started a trend that just kind of like swept through other fighting games. You know, like Street Fighter did one in Street Fighter 5, Tekken ended up doing one that was awful, you know, Marvel vs. Capcom had one, Guilty Gear Strive had one. You know, so many other fighting games have, you know, been so inspired by what the cinematic story mode was and how successful it was for NetherRealm and for Mortal Kombat. And ultimately, I don't think other fighting games really did a good enough job, you know, like they never really lived up to what NetherRealm did. I think mostly because of that is probably the budget, if I had to guess, as to why NetherRealm keeps exceeding the cinematic story modes where other games kind of fail, because, you know, Street Fighter 5's got absolutely panned. Tekken's, I think the response from fans got panned. I don't know if like commercially or, you know, like kind of casually it got panned. I hate Tekken 7 story, but I actually think it's worse than Street Fighter 5's. But again, rambling, that's not important. But I really think World Tour might be one of those things where it's like, this might honestly be something that like, if this really is the game mode that A, that they're saying it is, and B, that a lot of people are expecting or hoping it to be, this could possibly be the new trend that other fighting games pick up. Like, we could totally see in like 5, maybe 10 years time, you know, probably not the next Tekken game, but maybe the Tekken game after, Tekken 9 or whatever, we can maybe see like a full-on mode where you're wandering around the world of Tekken in the same vein as World Tour or other games like that, you know. And even for like Mortal Kombat, it's not something that's really foreign to them, because years ago on the PlayStation 2, when they did their own type of mode similar to World Tour called Conquest Mode, that was in Mortal Kombat Deception, and I love Conquest Mode, and that to me was really what got me into the world of Mortal Kombat and the mythos and the lore and just the different realms and stuff like that. And I really think, you know, just from what we've seen of World Tour and what they've kind of been saying about it, I really think this could be something special, basically. That's basically what I'm saying. I think this could be a mode that could really just shake up how other fighting games in the genre kind of view their single-player story modes. Because honestly, it's that thing. I think the time of cinematic story modes for franchises that basically aren't made by NetherRealm Studios, I think their time has come and gone. I really would be shocked if games like Tekken or the next Guilty Gear or whatever had, you know, cinematic story modes. I think the demand for them is just not as, it's just not there anymore for most people. I feel like most people, when they want cinematic story modes, I think they just want them done by NetherRealm, which I totally get, because the thing with NetherRealm is they have the budget and the presentation that just makes it feel like a blockbuster movie, and I don't think the other kind of like fighting game developers or series are capable of kind of doing it. I don't know, that's just kind of my kind of like, you know, thoughts and theory on it, but I digress. But World Tour mode honestly could be that deception, you know, it could be the thing that just really expands the world of Street Fighter into this huge thing. And just the idea of like just wandering around Metro City and just seeing different Street Fighter characters across the series. They don't even have to be playable, you know, like just wandering around the city and seeing Mayor Cody, or, you know, going down the street and finding, I don't know, Ryu fighting somebody, you know, stuff like that. It's just the things they could do with it, and just expanding that world and just making it into something that can just be enjoyed by everybody, you know, people who have no real knowledge of Street Fighter's world or characters. You know, I can just plop somebody into the game who's never heard of really Street Fighter outside of like maybe Ryu, and just kind of go like, here's the world of Street Fighter, and then hopefully by the time they spend in this mode, they can be like, oh yeah, like this character who showed up, and be like, oh yeah, that's a character who debuted in this game who's a part of the Street Fighter world. And like, I don't know, I just feel like it's such a great avenue to really just explore the world, explore the characters, and really just make Street Fighter's world feel like this massive thing that they've in the past they kind of done by kind of like absorbing all these different other like Capcom franchises like Final Fight and Strider and all these other things into kind of, you know, the world of Street Fighter. And I think because they've spent so long building that world, I think now with World Tour mode, they now have the ability to really show this world that they've created. And I think that's such a great thing. Other than that though, I just, every time I see this game, I just get the biggest smile on my face. Like, it really is just something that I never could have dreamed of. I never could have expected the Capcom that made Street Fighter V to later make this game. Like, it seems crazy to me, it seems insane, but here we are, and you know, it just looks amazing, and I can't stop gushing about it really. Like, I know, you know, it's that thing I said at the start, like, oh, my concerns and all that. I honestly don't even have that many concerns. Like, I know for a fact when I pick this game up next year and I sit down to play it, I know I'm gonna love it. And I honestly don't even like really remember having this feeling for Street Fighter V, just this utter confidence that I know, like, already that I'm going to be getting a quality product. And it's just great, you know, and but it's weird at the same time. Like, I know I've seen other people talk about it, and while half of me is kind of like, you know, I think it's a bit unfair to kind of like assume, the other half of me agrees, and that, like, I feel like there has to be a catch. Like, I feel like there has to be something, like some bit of news, like they're gonna say like this part of the game, like they're gonna show off something, and it's gonna, you know, it's gonna be crushing disappointment. It's gonna, like, all this goodwill and all these good vibes that they brought is gonna, you know, come crashing down. But you know what? I honestly don't know what they could do, like, to really ruin the game. Obviously, touch wood, I hope they don't. But like, when I would like think about what a Street Fighter game that was set after Street Fighter 3 in the timeline would be like, and obviously utterly overjoyed at that they've not only done that for this game, but that was one of the first things they really confirmed about it, like after they revealed the game at the State of Play, was that yes, this game was taking place after Street Fighter 3 in the timeline. Like, when I would dream about that game, like, what would a Street Fighter game be like that's finally set after Third Strike? Honestly, this game is pretty much doing almost everything that I would have wanted it to. Like, that game that I thought of, that I dreamed of, like, Street Fighter 6 at the moment seems like it is that game. And it feels crazy for me to even say that, you know, that, like, this is the game that I've always wanted. And, you know, not every factor is being met. As I said earlier, there is one kind of my only real major negative, which I'm going to get to later. But like, other than that, like, honestly, I just don't have any real complaints. Like, even when I like look at the gameplay, and obviously I'm not going to say the full speech again that I normally do whenever I get to talk about gameplay, but like, for me, that normally doesn't really care about that. I've seen the gameplay, I've seen the footage that people have been doing, like, I've been watching the breakdowns done by Maximilian Dude, and like, the game just looks so fun. Like, I really can't wait to just play it for myself. And like, you know, I don't really have concerns about the drive system or the drive gauge. I'm interested in it, but I think for me, like, I just want to find out how it works for myself, because I've heard all this talk about it. I've heard people kind of like try their best to break it down, both people who have played the game and Capcom themselves. And while I do understand it, I think it is that thing that I want to just kind of experience for myself. And so far, it really just seems like just a big smushing together of like elements, like gameplay mechanics from other Street Fighter games, which is what I was talking about earlier when I was like, oh, you know, like, I know Street Fighter 6 is also kind of like taking elements from other games in the series, but it's doing it with its own flair. Like, when Street Fighter 5 had like stuff like parries, obviously like Ryu had a parry, but it was in his V trigger, but like, or his V skill, but like, it felt like just a very lame version of what Street Fighter 3's parry was. And, you know, as I've said, I'm a big fan of Street Fighter 3 and Third Strike and all that, but like, I've never really been a big like worshipper of the parry. I think parries are cool, I think they're flashy, and I think they're a really great way to kind of just let the player basically look at the cool shit that they can do while in a match. But I've never been a huge proponent like, oh, they should bring back parries should be in every Street Fighter game. Like, I get the concern around them, I get why people are very against parries, but like, the parries in this game, like, obviously they work differently. They kind of work a bit similar to Ryu's parry, I think, in terms of like the input, you know, because one thing I do like about Street Fighter 3's parries, it's just one button, it's so simple, and you know, like, given it's just the forward button, I kind of feel like it's very easy to accidentally get like a parry in there, whereas with like two separate buttons I have to push together at the same time. I think it's triangle and circle at the same time, which I believe was the V skill input in 5. Like, I kind of feel like you have to kind of consciously want to parry, but what I've seen of the parry, like, it's not so much like, yes, it's a timing thing, but like, once you get the timing right, it's like you can just hold it and just parry everything. And I feel like, again, it's taking a concept and it's just doing it with its own flair and doing it in a way that fits with the other systems they got. Like, I know they have Street Fighter Force focus attacks and stuff like that, and it just looks really fun, and I'm just, I'm so excited to just get my hands on it. I know people like, again, Max have said that, like, in terms of games that he feels like Street Fighter 6 kind of feels the most similar to, he says Third Strike. And obviously I think Third Strike is the greatest fighting game of all time. Completely subjective. I'm not saying it is objectively the best. It's my personal favorite. But the one thing I just like about Street Fighter 3 Third Strike is that it's just so fun to play. I can just pick it up and I can just have fun and I can just do cool stuff, and I can just... The way it feels and plays is just so satisfying to me. And I like in playing other Street Fighter games, like I'll play Alpha 2, all day if I could. Or Street Fighter 4 I'll even mess around with for a bit, and 5. But there's just that thing with Third Strike where it's the only real fighting game that I just feel like I can play for like 3 hours and just not feel like I've wasted any like second of those 3 hours. And yeah, people saying that Street Fighter 6 is kind of in that same vein. I don't know, I don't think it will be exactly the same, obviously. I feel like it's impossible to kind of like capture that kind of essence that those fighting games in the past had, no matter how hard you try. And that's not just for Third Strike. I feel that about every fighting game. I don't think any fighting game, Street Fighter or otherwise, will really play exactly like how 5 did, or 4, or Alpha 3, or whatever. And I think that's a good thing. I think it allows these games to, breathe on their own and kind of stand out. But, when you kind of like look at all these elements that they kind of like other games have taken, like how 5 had the parry with Ryu, and, it was just like, here's a parry, here's a parry that Ryu can do. It works a bit differently from a parry, but it's just a parry. Like, it's just, like, have you ever played Street Fighter 3? Well, here you go, here's a parry. Whereas with Street Fighter 6, I feel like, here's a parry, but it's just like, this is how Street Fighter 6 does parries. Like, we're doing it differently. Like, yes, it's a parry, and if you've seen Street Fighter 3, you know what this is, but like, we're doing it in a way where it just feels and looks different, and I really do appreciate that. So that's all I really want to say on the gameplay. Obviously, as well, the stuff with the super gauges and, the super arts, really happy to see super arts back in 3 each of those. I've also seen that apparently when you're below, I think 30% health, the super arts become a critical art and like a powered up version. I think that's an awesome idea. I love the critical art naming and all that from 5. So I'm glad they're kind of like, they're keeping that. And it's good, I feel like this is the right way to kind of like celebrate the rest of the series, Whereas with 5, it was just like, do you remember this? Do you remember Alpha? Do you remember 3? Do you remember 4? Do you remember 2? This is kind of like, hey, we're kind of taking this from 4, or we're kind of taking this from 5, but we're going to just do it in a new way that isn't just the same thing you've been seeing in the last game or the game before that. We're just doing it again, but we're doing it with a twist. And I feel like when it comes to Street Fighter 6 reusing stuff from other games, I feel like that's kind of generally what they're doing. And I really do appreciate that. And I think it really just makes it a game that I think is worth being excited for. So yeah, that's all I really want to say about the gameplay. In terms of other stuff though, I think the game looks amazing. I think every character so far has just looked fantastic. I mean, I don't know if I'd go as far as to say this is the best like X character has ever looked, but I think so far everyone is looking on top form, and I'm very excited to see other characters, the ones that aren't just the ones that we know about if the leaks, other characters from other games. I really can't wait for them to come in and, just to see how they're done. I would love to see Dudley, how Dudley would look in this art style with this kind of like redesigned mentality to fit the themes of the game. Same with characters like Sakura or Sodom or, Alex and Sean, obviously, or Rose. Have I mentioned Rose? I can't remember if I mentioned Rose. But, just so many characters that they could pull from, and I really would like to see how pretty much every character, almost, within reason. I mean, no Rufus, please. But, like, I would love to see how almost every character would look, in this style. Like even T-Hawk, a character who I've said before I really do not like that much. I would be fascinated to see how they could reinvent T-Hawk, because so far from all the other redesigns that we've seen from the leaks, like I don't think any of them are really bad. Like I think some of them aren't as great as the ones before, but I wouldn't call any design like objectively bad, or like, I wouldn't say this design sucks. And I think that's very kind of rare, for a game to be like that. I mean, because there were some redesigns in 5 that I liked, but I thought like either the execution wasn't great or I just wasn't keen on the design in general. So yeah, visually the game looks amazing, and I can't stop gushing about it. Like again, I'm like watching gameplay of it now, and it just, I never would have thought that this was what Street Fighter 6 would end up looking like, or just being like. But unfortunately, as I've said all this and I've gushed, I now unfortunately have to get to the part of it that I am not happy with. And as you all know, this is probably the one that you've been expecting. This is the part where I talk about the roster. So now we get to the dreaded talk about the roster, where I've got to actually talk shit about this game for a minute. And, I did talk about this not long after all the leaks came out, and I did delete that video because honestly, as I've said in kind of, I think in one of my other videos, but I felt like my emotions were a bit too raw in that video. I mean, not to say I was crying or anything, but I was definitely a bit down, a bit mopey. And so yeah, if you've seen that video, if you're one of the few people who saw that video that commented or whatever before I took it down, you'll kind of know what this is about. I think in other videos as well, I think the video I did on the leaks, I brushed on this very, very briefly. And I said I was going to wait to talk about this because I wanted, more confirmation. I wanted to know for sure whether or not we were going to actually get more characters, from the ones that were shown in the leak. But at this point, I think it's safe to say the leak that has been going around is indeed the base roster for this game. I would be shocked if there are more characters included in the base roster than the ones we've already seen images for. And yeah, time to stop beating around the bush and just say it. There are no Street Fighter 3 characters in the space roster. There are also no alpha characters, which honestly shocks me more. And yes, while Street Fighter 5 did have a heavy focus on alpha characters, to not have one in the base roster is mind-blowing to me. Like, Street Fighter 3 characters not being there, it sucks, it shouldn't be a thing. But you know what, in a kind of fucked up way, I can kind of expect that. I could kind of maybe have seen that coming because of just the nature of 3 and the way Capcom view it, maybe, that I'll kind of get into in a minute. But Alpha, Alpha is beloved. I would honestly say at this point, some or most of Alpha's newcomers are as beloved as, some of the Street Fighter 2 characters even. Not, the top tier ones. I mean, obviously, I think very few characters, maybe Sakura is up there with maybe, Chun or Ken or Ryu. But those games were beloved. Those games did very well. And Street Fighter 3 did not do well. And in that sense, I get it, I think it's dumb, I think it's stupid to still if that's the reason, if the reason for it is because they're still, afraid that, Street Fighter 3 characters in a base roster, they're gonna, people are gonna open up the game when it comes out, and they're gonna go through the roster, and they're gonna see all the, beloved World Warriors, they're gonna see Kami and Akuma, and they're gonna be, oh yes, I feel at home, and then they're gonna scroll down, and then they're going to see Dudley, and they're just going to scream and rage and shake and cry and be like, who is this? I don't recognize this. This isn't, I'm being a twat. But, I don't think anybody's really going to do that. And if that is the reason, I'm not saying that is the reason. I have my own kind of theories about it, really, about why they're doing this. That, again, I will get into in a minute. But, if that is the reason, though, and my kind of theories are wrong, Capcom are idiots. No other real way for me to say it. They need to get over themselves. They need to get over the series, really. They need to get over this weird fear of 3, if that is the reason, of course. But yeah, to say I'm surprised is, I would say, yeah, maybe. I really thought this was going to be the game. This was going to be the game where we were actually finally going to get a Street Fighter 3 character in the base roster. We haven't had one in a game since 3. Obviously 4 didn't have any when that came out, and neither did 5. I think 5 was probably the closest to, getting Street Fighter 3 characters in that base roster. I don't have a source, so I could be completely wrong on this, but I think it's been said by maybe Ono or somebody else who was working on Street Fighter 5 that I think the plan at one point was to release the game with the initial 16 plus the Season 1 characters, so the game was going to have basically Alex, Yuri and Ibuki in the game day 1, so we were going to get 3, but obviously 5 went the way it did, and it got rushed out when it shouldn't have, and blah blah blah, we all know the story by now. So yeah, unfortunately, 3rd game in a row now where it's looking like we're not getting any Street Fighter 3 characters, and yeah, it's disappointing and it crushes my soul a bit, but onwards and upwards and all that. But no, for real, it is that thing where it's it is incredibly disappointing. And so far, it is the only blemish on this game I have. If this game had one, literally one, I'm not even, it's that thing, I'm not even addressing the fact that there's half the base roster of the game is again Street Fighter 2 characters, because that was one thing I was very adamant I didn't want, because Street Fighter 5's base roster, that was 16 characters, and 8 of those were from Street Fighter 2, and that's the thing of I hated that back then. I loathed that base roster for that reason. I thought that was far too many for the size that it was. And now, if Street Fighter 6's base roster ends up being 22 characters, which again I think it will, we're looking at about 11 characters being from Street Fighter 2 again, which is half the base roster. But honestly, I've not even really thought about that much. Yeah, when I'm thinking about it now, because I'm talking about it, it annoys me a bit. But at the same time, I think because this roster is so bigger. And yes, I'm one of those people that thinks this is the base roster. I know people have been theorizing and trying to make it kind of seem like that, this could just be, the top, like the 8 World Warriors and the 8 new characters are all, they're just the base roster and it's 16 again. And the 6 in the middle, Kami, DJ, Rashid, Juri, Ed, and Akuma, they're the Season 1 DLC characters. I don't believe that for a second. I think Capcom have been making a conscious effort to really right the wrongs that they feel like, Street Fighter 5 did, that Street Fighter 5 was kind of lambasted for when that came out back in 2016. And while it wasn't a big thing, I do think the base roster being kind of a bit pitiful when that game came out was definitely one of the things that I think people complained about. So I don't think we're getting 16 characters again. I very much think that this is the base roster. I think my only real proof of that is we've seen footage of Kami. We've seen her in the game. She's in the Battle Hub menu. In one of the screenshots, like she's on the scoreboard at the top of the screen. She's in the arcade machines. I'm pretty sure Kami's in the game. And, considering she's in this middle section with the other kind of like the non-World Warrior and the non-new characters, I'm fairly certain that basically I'm fairly certain that this is indeed this is the base roster. Maybe if we're lucky, but I'm not getting my hopes up for even then I think 2 more would be good. If I could just 2 more characters, 1 from Alpha, 1 from 3, and I would literally never complain. I would not have a complaint about this game for the rest of the time that they show it, until they eventually added more with DLC. But yeah, speaking of DLC, that's where my theory comes in. At this point, I'm pretty convinced that the main reason they're doing this is because and again, this is actually kind of, weirdly enough, it's a positive towards 3, even though it might not seem like it. Basically, I feel like where I think Capcom is going with this, where their logic is going, is that I feel like they actually do have a lot of confidence in 3, and more so Alpha, but, actually, I would probably say about equal 3 in Alpha. I think they know that, they need the World Warriors, they need the original 8, and they need, a couple of the other extra Street Fighter 2 characters thrown in there to bring in the people that, the lapsed fans of Street Fighter, the lapsed fans of fighting games, the people who played Street Fighter 2 in the arcades back in the day. I think those are the people they're trying to lure in, so it's like, okay, you come in, hey, look, we've got Honda, we've got Blanca, we've got all your favorites, they're all here, and they all look new, but, we're going to have classic costumes, don't worry, we don't want to ruin your nostalgia too much. And we're going to bring you in, and we're going to make you buy your copy. It's like reeling them in, it's like just fishing, all these World Warriors, they're all bait. And the fishing in the world, the fans of those games, the ones that haven't played fighting games in years, the ones that are oh, I need my World Warriors or else I'm not buying it. They're reeling them in, go, got them on the bait, and they've reeled them in, and they bought a copy. And now they're in, that's a sold copy. They don't have to buy DLC, they bought a copy, that's enough for them. And those people are in, they're hooked, they're playing World Tour mode. It's like, you know what, you go play World Tour mode and you can just do that. And then once that's in, it's like, okay, now we can kind of throw out some more interesting bait to kind of help lure in the extra people that aren't necessarily, fooled by the initial World Warrior bait. They want something a bit more interesting, so Capcom can go okay, here you go, here's Dudley, here's Makoto, here's Rose, here's Sakura. And they can help reel those people in with additional, bait. And this is a weird analogy I'm using right now. I don't know why this went into fishing, but that's kind of where I was going with this, basically. I think they've gone so Street Fighter 2 heavy with the space roster is because they want those lapsed fans. They want those people who, were kind of they were big on Street Fighter 2 back in the day. They liked Alpha, but they were mainly there for the Street Fighter 2 characters. And then Street Fighter 3 came out and there was none. It was just Ryu and Ken, and they were like, oh no, I don't want this. And then they left, and then they probably didn't play fighting games for a while, and because then there were no Street Fighter games for 10 years. And then eventually Ono came back, did the World Warrior Nostalgia Tour, or the first version of the World Warrior Nostalgia Tour, and basically said, hey, here's all your World Warriors, here's all the characters you love from all these games, let's bring them back, let's, forget Street Fighter 3, that game, blah, blah, blah. And, it worked with Street Fighter 4. Street Fighter 4 was very successful. And at this point, the data doesn't lie, as much as I would hate to admit it. Street Fighter 5 did not have the World Warriors in their day one, and that game did not do well at launch. I'm not saying that was the sole reason, but when you kind of look at it, maybe they are needed. And it's that thing, at the end of the day, I don't really care that they're all in there. Does it bother me? A little bit. But at the very least, according to this leak, there's a lot of other really interesting characters, both new and returning. At the moment, Ed is really speaking to me from that leaked concept art that was out there. And several of the new characters, like Kimberly and JP and I think Manon, they all, very interesting to me. And there's definitely a lot there for me to kind of, bide my time until the DLC starts coming out. And yeah, at this point, I'm utterly convinced. I feel like the DLC for Street Fighter 6, that first season is going to be purely Street Fighter 3 and Alpha. I would honestly say, if anything, probably more Street Fighter 3 than Alpha. But who knows? I mean, if they do 6 character seasons again, I could easily see that first season being 3 Alpha characters, 3 Street Fighter 3 characters. Maybe even a Final Fight character thrown in there. Maybe I'm still convinced Damned is going to show up in this game someday. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. It's disappointing, and it is that thing of like, every time I see gameplay for this, like sometimes I see it and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm like just loving it, it's so good, and then just that bit at the back of my mind just goes, there's no Street Fighter 3 characters, and then I'm like, oh, now I'm sad. But yeah, that's like my only real negative at this point. But at the same time, it's that thing, it's like I'm putting faith in Capcom. Like, I'm fairly confident I know what they're doing. I know why they're doing this. I get it. I know they want this game to sell really well straight out the gate. I know they want a lot of people invested in it. And as much as, I would personally hate it, or not hate it, but as much as I would, kind of be disinclined to admit it, they are needed. You need the World Warriors, you need them in there, because they are what really brought this series to the peak that it was, like Street Fighter 2 was just a sensation. It revolutionized the genre. It was just, I would even say revolutionized games in general. And yeah, so it sucks, but I'm confident that we will, for DLC. And that's another thing a lot of people were saying, and not just, in my comments, but in other places I've seen all over. One very, very big positive from this, and one that I'm also quite happy about, is that, like, we don't have to basically spend the next 5 years wondering when Honda's going to show up, or when Blanca's going to take a DLC spot. Like, he's there, he's in the game now. And while I personally would just be fine with, those characters, just not being there, but obviously that's not really going to be a thing. Like, from now on, I know for a fact, from this point onwards, every Street Fighter game is going to have the 8 World Warriors in their day one. It's just going to. They're never going to do what 5 did and kind of spread them out again, because it just doesn't work in their favor, apparently, based on the evidence. Because that was one thing, like, people would, like, I remember, like, even, like, buy Champion Edition, like when like Gil was coming out, and people were kind of like, oh, like, you just buy Champion Edition, you get everything, you don't have to buy everything piecemeal anymore. I remember people were still going on about how they had to pay for Guile, and I was just like, it's been like 4 years, get over it. But evidently they don't, and that's kind of the only real like negative thing I have to say about fans of World Warriors and all that. I mean, obviously I did that kind of, I guess you could say it was a bit of an insulting bit with the fishing bait, implying they're just bait being hooked in to buy, to consume products and all that. But at the same time, I feel like, just from my experience, I feel like, honestly, from the experiences I've had, I'm not generalizing the whole fan base. I know not everybody's like this, but just from my experiences, the people I've seen that I've interacted with, who are staunch Street Fighter 2 fans, the ones who are adamant that like every game has to have the original 8 World Warriors in it, like, or else, the game is shit. I disagree very much with that. But those people, I feel like, they are very entitled people. They feel like they are owed X and Y, and if X and Y isn't in the game, then the game fails, and they're not going to buy it. And, I could do the same thing. I could be like, you know what, I'm not going to support Street Fighter 6, I'm not doing coverage on this game until I see Sean in the game, or I see Alex, or the other characters I like. But I know that's dumb, because I don't really have an entitled leg to stand on, if that makes sense. I know I can't be entitled with Street Fighter and Street Fighter characters, because, to be honest, my characters barely fucking get in the first place. So it's like, what leg do I have to stand on to put my foot down and be like, I'm not doing this until they add my character? But, I feel like that with people who like the World Warriors and Street Fighter 2 characters in general, I feel like they are naturally just entitled, because they're so used to it, and they're so used to being catered to. And so many people I've already like been in arguments with, and like just tried to get across, being like, because people are like, oh, we don't need Street Fighter 3 characters in the base roster. Oh, well, and it's like, you can't spare one. Like, are you that like just selfish that like you just can't even imagine just one character in a base roster of like 22? Like, you just couldn't think of just maybe making it 23 and just one Street Fighter 3 character. But no, evidently some people are just incapable of that. And yeah, it sucks. It is what it is. But as I said, that's my only real issue with the game. And that's an issue that I know will get resolved one day. When the DLC gets announced, I will be very excited. I'll be on the edge of my seat, hopefully waiting for the characters that I would like to be in the game to make it. At the moment, I feel like if I had to pick 3 Street Fighter 3 characters to, be the first 3 DLC characters for the game, personally speaking, I think my first 3 that I would pick, and obviously 1 you could all be expecting. 1 is Sean, obviously. 2 would probably be Dudley, and then 3 would be Makoto. I think those would be 3 very good choices for, you know, the first 3 characters from Street Fighter 3 to make it into 6. I feel like Sean, as I've said before, fits the hip-hop aesthetic and just street vibe that Street Fighter 6 is going for. I think he fits that to a T and would be such a perfect fit. Dudley and Makoto are both very beloved in 1 and 5. And yeah, I think those would be very interesting, would be very exciting. I think a lot of people would be interested by that. Like, I'm not expecting Necro or something like that. I mean, even like characters like Alex and Ibuki, while I think they will probably make it in the game someday, I'm fine with them kind of sitting out because they were only just in 5. Same with characters like Gil and Oro and Yuri, and like, I would like them eventually. I'm not really bothered about, you know, getting them day 1, like, straight away. My definite focus is on the characters that won in, you know, 4 and 5. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at the moment. And yeah, that's kind of all I really wanted to talk about. I said at the start I didn't want this video to be long, and I know this video was already very, very long. So yeah, I want to wrap this up. Yeah, Street Fighter 6 is looking amazing. I honestly just, in terms of the game itself, when I get rid of all of my Street Fighter 3 bias and kind of just purely look at the product itself, I think this is just going to be such a special game. World Tour mode looks phenomenal. We also have confirmation, by the way, that Takayuki Nakayama let slip in the IGN interview that I was talking about earlier in the video. He basically said that Metro City is the first stage of World Tour mode, which I'm not surprised at, but at the same time I am kind of like, ooh, because the trailer was so heavy on Metro City that I was honestly kind of like, it seems so expansive, and like there were elements that looked like it could have been China, both like in the scene where Chun-Li is fighting with Li Fen and like other aspects of the main character were like kind of wandering around what looked like Chinese markets. But I think at the same time, it still very much looked like it could be like a Chinatown district of Metro City. So I basically thought what they were probably going to do was have like Metro City be the hub, and there's just different aspects of different sides of Metro City that kind of inspired by different countries, and that was going to be the World Tour mode. But no, it definitely sounds like we are going to be jettisoning across the world. You know, we'll probably go to places like China and Brazil, and that's so exciting to me. I really just like, because then that puts the world in World Tour mode. It puts the world in Street Fighter, and the world of Street Fighter has been so synonymous with the world. You know, characters have been from so many different countries, and like the name of Street Fighter 2 and the name of the characters that debuted in Street Fighter 2, the World Warriors, it's just been synonymous with the series for years. And I think it would have been a very big shame to have World Tour mode only happen in Metro City. And I mean, like, I love Metro City. I think it's such a fascinating location, and I love the look of it from the trailer. But, you know, having that confirmation is very good. Fighting Ground is basically, you know, as I've said, that's the game itself, and the game itself is looking amazing. And then Battle Hub. Oh yeah, I actually never mentioned what my theory about Battle Hub was. Yeah, so basically, for those that remember, back in the day, and I say back in the day, it was only like the PS3 generation, which it still makes me feel old though for some reason. But on the PlayStation 3, there was a kind of built-in software that you could use called PlayStation Home. And basically, you could go into PlayStation Home and you could create your avatar, and you could basically dress your avatar in different various themes of like PlayStation characters and stuff like that. Like you could dress them as Kratos, I think, and just stuff like that. And you basically just wandered around this digital world, and it was kind of like The Sims in a way, but without like the building aspect. But like, imagine The Sims but online is kind of like my only real way of kind of, I think, describing what PlayStation Home was like for those that never played it. But PlayStation Home, and I played a lot of PlayStation Home, and like back then it fascinated me, just the idea, the concept of PlayStation Home and how it worked. And I remember just walking around, and like the thing about PlayStation Home is like you would just wander out, and there were just every person you met was somebody else who had a PlayStation 3 that was playing PlayStation Home, and you could walk around, interact, and talk with people. And personally, I feel like that's what Battle Hub is going to be. I feel like it's going to be Street Fighter's PlayStation Home. I feel like the models that we create for World Tour mode, we're going to be able to take into Battle Hub, and basically I think it's just going to be a hub where we can wander around, we can talk to people, organize matches. I know people have spotted arcade machines for various Street Fighter games in the background, maybe even challenge people to find like 2 different Street Fighter games within Street Fighter 6, which I think would be insane. I don't know if they're actually going to do that, because that seems like a massive undertaking, but like if they do, then wow, that would just be insane. But yeah, and that's the thing where it's like, that's my theory, where like I think if they do it right, I think Battle Hub could be very, very interesting, and I could definitely see that being a very exciting aspect for me to explore. Just the idea, like, you know, I had this thought of like, you know, grand finals of EVO or something, and everybody's in the Battle Hub, and you know, there's just a giant screen at the back of that Battle Hub, and people are gathered around it with their avatars, and it's just playing the grand finals of EVO, and you're watching the 2 players fight, you know, Street Fighter 6, you know, grand finals of EVO, and people with their avatars are in Battle Hub, and they're just watching it on the screen, and like people are organizing matches, and it just feels like a community that you just, you know, you're just in, you know. And like I said, I think it could have a lot of potential, and I am very interested in seeing what they do with it. So yeah, that's it for now. Like I said, I did not mean for this video to go on for as long as I did, but I am going to end it here. Yeah, those were my honest and very rambly thoughts about Street Fighter 6, but I think at this point you're probably used to me rambling on this channel. But yeah, I'm just so excited, like I just want to see more. I can't wait to see more. I really want to see other characters, like even the characters in the leak that I don't care about. Like, couldn't give two shits about Zangief or Honda, but like, would love to see how they play in this game or how they look and how they translate to this art style and the engine that they're using, the RE engine. So yeah, plenty of great things ahead. Hopefully it's not too long before we find more news. But for now, this will probably be my last video on Street Fighter 6 until we get more updates. So yeah, I'm not going to waste anyone's more time after this, so thank you for watching if you've gotten all the way to the end, and goodbye.
We await your return, warrior.